Hello, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this Stay in Control workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Many of you may know, been great to meet and a lot of you around the bazaars and meet you virtually via this webcast. I'm Matt Lane, I'm a head of training. I'm an active single and multi FI and examiner. And as ever, I'm glad to be joined by Nigel Wilson. So Nigel, say hello.
Hi everyone, yeah, Nigel Wilson here. I'm a head of training for an ATO and a DTO, and you might know me from Easy PPL as well, but I'm a flying instructor, flying examiner, and display pilot and all sorts of other stuff too.
Brilliant. Thanks as ever for joining us, Nigel. And tonight I'm really absolutely delighted to have real special guest with us, Mark Greenfield, Greeners. Say hello, introduce yourself, Greeners, although you need no introduction, of course.
That's very kind, Matt. Good evening, guys. Real pleasure to be here. I'm Mark Greenfield, or Greeners. I run Ultimate High. So we are a specialist UPRT academy. We teach formation, we teach aerobatics, we teach display flying. But my speciality for the last really 15 years has been upset prevention and recovery training.
Brilliant. Mark's too humble to say, but we're also delighted to recognise that London Guildhall, I believe, Mark, you're going to be receiving an honour the Air Pilots Award for significant contribution to flight safety. So, congratulations, and we'll look out for the media on that as well. So, well done on that.
Thank you.
Over the next 75 minutes, we're going to break the workshop down into some easily digestible chunks. We're going to recover how do pilots end up out of control, flight upsets, how to stay in control, what to do if you end up out of control. Mark's going to give us some really interesting stuff as a startle factor. We're also going to talk about what the commercial UPRT course does and maybe some of the relevance to that into PPL, General Aviation Training. And also we're going to talk about, the examining, instructing community are starting to look at stalling, stall prevention, stall recoveries and that. So we may touch on some of those ideas and some of those discussions that are around and about as well. Finally, it'll be Q&A, which we'd love you to take part in. Remember, we've got the Q&A box, which is separate to the chat box. So please add those and I will manage those and look after your questions. After the workshop tonight, we'd love you to stay in the loop with events and resources. Please sign up to our mailing list, and you can do this on our website, which Sophie, who's doing the tech for us tonight, will drop in the chat box. And if you go to the website or go to the links that you'll get in the post-events email, you can sign up and get access to the resources and things. There'll also be a link to a YouTube video replay of this event this evening coming out to you, so don't worry about having to take notes, or if there's things that you want to re-look at or rethink about, you'll be able to do that on the YouTube replay. As ever, like to kick off with a poll, and this just gives you opportunity to try out the polls. Remember, if you're watching the YouTube replay, you won't have the poll functionality, but we'll talk through it. But like I say, also to emphasize, as ever, we have absolutely no record of who said what on the polls throughout this evening as well. So don't worry, it's just a bit of fun. It's not a test, and there's absolutely no records of who said what or what the results are as well. It's just indicative of this. So let's have this first poll up, please, Sophie. What do people mainly fly? We know lots of you fly lots of different ones. So just what is the main type that you fly? Gives us a good idea of who we've got in the virtual audience tonight. Let's have a look at results, please. Brilliant. So lots of single engine piston. Great to see some of the microlight community and glider community here with us, and some multi people as well. And some of our gyro community. Excellent. I know we had some questions as to whether the gyro flying aspects might be relevant, but as I think I corresponded with some of your email, some of those other types, the startle factor stuff is still really, really relevant to you, you flyers out there. So it's great to have you with us this evening as well. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Greeners to talk about flight upsets, and I know he's going to start with another poll as well.
Thank you very much. Well, let's have a look at the poll then, shall we? So to start off with, we're talking about flight upsets, but what do we understand by flight upsets? What is a flight upset? So there's a bunch of questions there. Is it where the pitch attitude exceeds large degrees of nose up or nose down? Is it where the angle of bank exceeds 60 degrees? Is it where the aircraft is about to stall or has stalled, or any time the airplane isn't doing what you expect it to do? Now, there may be a perfect answer to this, or there may not. So what I'm really interested in here is kind of generating some thought about this. So please put down whatever you think is the most appropriate response. So I feel there should be some background music, maybe some Top Gun stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's not appropriate. So looking at the results there, then it's a really interesting one, because when people started talking about flight upsets, there was, in a document called the Airplane Prevention Recovery Training Aid version 2, a set of definitions about what constituted a flight upset. And those definitions were 45 degrees outside of 45 degrees angle of bank, more than 25 degrees nose up, or more than 10 degrees nose down. But the difficulty with that, amongst other things, was that if you're kind of in that V-shaped box, it kind of suggests you can't be in a flight upset. So as GA pilots, all of those things might constitute a flight upset. If the aircraft is about to stall or has stalled, it may well be a flight upset. And we had, the presenters had an interesting debate about this. But the bottom line is, I've got to grab my airplane now, sorry. The bottom line is, an airplane flying along straight and level might be in a flight upset if that's not what you're expecting the airplane to do. So really, we define a flight upset as any time the airplane isn't doing what you expect it to do. For aerobatics, if you're exceeding 60 degrees angle of bank, it's not a flight upset. If you're practicing a stalling exercise, it's not necessarily upset. Although if you're not expecting the airplane to be stalled, then it is a flight upset. But basically, anytime the airplane isn't doing what you expect it to do. Thank you. Okay, so, and that's using that definition. Let's have a look at this picture. You've got the firefly in the background, and I'm going to ask you, do you think that's a flight upset? Well, you know, using the definition we just talked about, it's because of the wing in the foreground, it looks like that firefly in the background is probably expecting to be there. And that was actually a formation loop. So yeah, that's probably not a flight upset. If you take away the wing in the foreground, then it becomes a lot grayer. It's an aerobatic airplane. It might be doing aerobatics. It might be doing something interesting. It may or may not be a flight upset. Rich, I'm delighted your house is in the background, fella. Obviously that was there especially for you. But if you take away the wing in the foreground and swap that firefly for a Piper Arrow, then yeah, it's almost certainly going to be a flight upset. So once again, it depends on what you think, what you're expecting the airplane to do. Thanks. And Chris, I thought it was wide, but it was Joss, so what do you expect? So when we talk about flight upsets, a lot of people get very excited about, you know, dramatic recoveries, you know, Fifi saves the day, all of this sort of thing. But in fact, upset prevention recovery training, the big focus is the prevention side. So we look to build a whole set of layers of protection. Okay, and we break this down into what we call avoid, recognize, and recover. And the low-hanging fruit is knowing when the flight upsets are most likely to happen, and then we can avoid them. We can make sure they just don't happen. Okay, so even though we spend a lot of time on UPRT courses teaching people how to recover from flight upsets, we want to make sure in an ideal world they never have to use those skills. It's like the superior captain demonstrating his or her superior airmanship to avoid having to demonstrate their superior skills. If you can't manage to avoid the flight upset, then early recognition is good. So the sooner you recognize the flight upset, the smaller the change you need to make to actually recover from that flight upset. And it's only if you blow through those first two layers of protection that you actually have to do some of that pilot stuff and fly an upset recovery. Okay, so that's very much the end of the very much the last part of our upset prevention and recovery training. So let's have a look then at the primary causes of flight upsets. And the bottom line is we tend to, there are a whole bunch of different causes which we can't really cover now. So I'm just going to gallop through them very quickly. We tend to break them into 3 categories. And the first category is environmental factors. So we get a bird strike, or gets hit by something falling from outer space, as appears to have been the case this week. A rapid weather change, so things like thunderstorms, CBs, updrafts, downdrafts, runway incursions, traffic conflicts, turbulence in particular, wake turbulence, particularly for us if we're flying around big aeroplanes, then turbulence can be a big thing for us. And these are only some of them: clear air turbulence, mountain waves. There's a whole bunch of environmental factors that can impact us as GA pilots. The next category is system or mechanical factors. So anytime your power plant has a problem, that's going to potentially cause a flight upset. If you do have autoflight systems, that's an issue, and we're going to talk about that later on in this session. Flight instruments going wrong, particularly IFR, can be a substantial cause of flight upsets. Erroneous sensor data, and your flight controls, any problems with jammed flight controls or malfunctioning flight controls, potentially going to cause us some problems. And then finally, and the biggest set of potential causes of flight upsets are human factors. This is probably causes the bulk of flight upsets for us as GA pilots. So system alerts, disorientation, loss of situational awareness, passenger distraction or interference can be a big cause of potential flight upsets. Fatigue, overload or complacency, sort of 3 different categories grouped together there. But yeah, fatigue is an issue in our world as well as it is in the commercial world. And lack of understanding of angle of attack. Now, this last one in particular is one that's going to ring a lot of bells, hopefully, for people. So let's talk about what is angle of attack. So angle of attack, as I'm sure everybody in this webinar is fully aware, is where the relative airflow meets the mean chord line of the wing. And aeroplanes don't stall at a particular speed. They stall at a particular angle of attack, and sometimes speed can largely be irrelevant. And the airplane doesn't care what the attitude is, it's only concerned with what the angle of attack is. Okay, so this is a lovely chart. This is from the Airplane Upset Prevention Recovery Training Aid version 3. And we've got 3 airplanes here. Okay, we've got 3 airplanes at the same pitch attitude. The middle airplane is flying straight and level. It's got an angle of attack. The airplane on the left-hand side is climbing, same pitch attitude as the middle airplane, but it's got a smaller angle of attack. And we can have a long chat about that, but basically the relative airflow is now kind of coming from above the airplane. So the angle of attack is less on that climbing airplane than it is on the straight and level airplane. But the really important one is the airplane on the right. That's a descending airplane, again, same pitch attitude, but because it's coming down, the relative airflow is coming from underneath the wing. And so the apparent angle of attack, or the actual angle of attack, is bigger than the other 2 airplanes. So that's really important to us. If we're descending and we've got a high angle of attack and we're in a stall, then we might have to make a very large change to the pitch attitude to get the angle of attack to a position where the airplane is actually flying effectively again. Thanks, Matt. So, and just to finish off this little piece here, what is the largest cause of fatalities in general aviation? Well, it's what we're talking about tonight. It's flight upsets resulting from loss of control in flight, okay, by some margin, and it has been for a number of years. Okay, so some of the stuff we're going to talk about later on, again, it's a gallop through because we're not spending a huge amount of time on this. When people come to us for their GA UPRT courses, we'll probably spend 4 or 5 hours on the technical knowledge side as well as the time in the airplane. But loss of control in flight is the largest cause of fatalities in general aviation. So that's really important. So this whole session we're talking about tonight is absolutely critical. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you. Really great scene setter there. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to Nigel's talking about how to stay in control. And we're going to look at some startle factors, so that'll be really interesting as well. And then looking about what happens if it all goes wrong, that far right hand side of the arrow as Mark showed us. But Nigel, over to you.
So how to stay in control. So in our usual way, we're going to start with a quick poll, and we're going to come back to this particular poll. So let's have a look at this question then. So when turning base to short final, the tailwind on base leg results in the aircraft going through the extended centre line of the runway. So what's the best course of action to take? Bear in mind, we're on final to land here. So do we increase the bank angle to tighten the turn back to the centre line? Do we increase the rudder application to tighten the turn back to centre line? Or do we do both of those things? Or do we roll the wings level and go around? Okay, so like I said, a practical question, all right, and let's just see what people have come up with then. So let's have a look at the answers, and they are good. Okay, so the majority of you have gone to roll the wings level and go around. What's this? About 22% of you have said the C, you do both A and B, and a minority of people have done just the individuals of rolling and or then applying the rudder. So the correct answer, of course, is we should roll the wings level and go around, because if we do A, that's going to increase the load factor, which is basically going to increase the angle of attack that Greeners has just been saying. B is going to provide us with possibly an out of balance turn, so we're going to introduce yaw, and if you do both A and B together, worst case scenario is you're going to spin. Okay, so D is actually the correct answer there. We should not attempt to get back onto the centre line. We need to keep in control. So let's take a look at the best ways of doing that then. So like all good things in aviation, if we follow good procedures, then we're less likely to find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to quickly chat about these things, about situational awareness. We're going to talk about work cycle. We're going to talk about energy state awareness and angle of attack. Well, Matt Greeners has just talked about that really, so we'll be talking about what energy state awareness means, and a bit about decision making and some prioritization. So let's take a look at the first one of those then, situational awareness. We have chatted about this before at various points on our seminars, but so what is situational awareness? Well, put simply, it's having an accurate perception of everything around you. So how do we do that? Well, that's helped by, planning ahead, listening to what's going on, feeling to a certain extent what's going on, and looking at what's going on. Looking out has been a good example there for VFR GA pilots. Think about the what ifs. Aviation's got a special name for that, the what ifs. It's called threat and error management. It's basically a risk assessment. That's just another name that aviation uses for it. And then think about the what's next. So fly the aircraft, but think ahead. Things like, how am I going to join the circuit? So all of these things sort of mean that we're not going to do something impulsive. So for example, back to that poll question, if we know there's a tailwind on base leg, then let's plan to start the base to final turn earlier so we don't go through the extended centre line. So a little bit more then, a bit of human factors then, if we could have the next slide, Matt, thanks. So we need to consider some stuff here, since situational awareness, or our own individual situational awareness, is often fallible. So let's not fall into some of the things that, we've sort of got on the screen there about confirmation bias is one of them, where we make the data fit our predetermined conclusion. In other words, we jump to conclusions and we make the data that we're looking at fit that conclusion instead of doing it the other way around. I mean, Air France is a classic example, the one that managed to stall from 30,000 feet into the sea. And that's a classic example that Greens was just talking about there, with the angle of descent, angle of attack being much greater in the descent, which is what happened to them. So let's have a look at the next one then, work cycle. So having a work cycle often, assists us not to get task focused. In other words, blinkered. So often when we perform a task, we might concentrate so intently at one particular aspect that we don't notice something else deteriorating, and that's what we want to catch. So that's where work cycle stuff comes in. So a quick example, if we're in a steep turn, going back to sort of instructing now, if we concentrate so much on the bank angle and not losing altitudes, there's a risk that we don't notice that the airspeed is reducing. So, as a result of that, we are loading the aircraft, we're holding the pitch up and pressure on the control column, and the result is, well, there's a higher risk of a stall. So in this instance here is an example of work cycle. We can look out the aeroplane, we can look outside and gauge our attitude, and then we come back and look at an instrument that is going to help us. Now, it's not always the same instrument we come back to. One time we come back and look at the airspeed, another time we confirm the bank angle on the attitude indicator, another time we confirm the altitude is being held correctly either on the altimeter or the VSI, and of course there's always the turn coordinate, and also for the balance ball, that is, and also the direction indicator. So there's other similar work cycles in other parts of piloting that are useful to help us monitor aspects of flight that can otherwise be missed. So, energy state awareness, we talked about that. That's the posh word that UPRT call it, all right? There's a GA way of thinking about it. You need one of three things. You need altitude, speed, or brains. Okay, you need at least two of those things. I'm sure you've heard that thing before. If we don't have any brains, then we need speed and altitude. Okay, if we haven't got any speed, then we need a bit of brain power and altitude, and obviously the other two you can work out for yourself. So, whilst that might seem a bit tongue-in-cheek, it's actually very relevant and true, especially the bit about the overloaded pilot, the lack of brains in that case. So what can happen when things start to go wrong, things like invert and IMC, or some aircraft malfunction, such as a recent one in the latest AIIB report, which is to do with trim runaway. We're going to come back to that in a bit. Key thing here is our trained instinct needs to be to fly the aeroplane and then, more importantly, make the aeroplane do what we want it to do. Okay, and that's using the appropriate control inputs. It's no use just tickling the stick and hoping that something's going to happen. Okay, you've got to be positive about what you do. So again, back to our poll question about overshooting the centre line. Again, our energy state in this case is low speed, low power. So any increase in load, that's what the bank and pitch angle is going to do. And bank angle is going to do, is going to reduce. It's going to result in a stall event and a possible loss of control. So again, if we know that's the case, then we are armed with that information that should prevent us from doing something that results in a loss of control. So just before we move on to the next session, let's have another quick poll. Okay. So this one's an interesting one. For those of you that fly an aircraft with an autopilot or an electric trim, how many of you have an item in your vital actions prior to departure checklist, those last things you do before you depart, that identifies the controlling circuit breaker for either the autopilot or electric trim? So the answer is yes, you do have a checklist that says that. No, you don't, or perhaps you don't fly an aeroplane with autopilots or electric trim. So hopefully that's pretty quick to answer. So let's have a look at the results then. Okay, so there's a fair number of you, 62% don't fly an aeroplane with that equipment. Okay, there's the majority of the people that are left. 26% say you don't have a checklist that it does this, and then only a very small percentage, 11% of you say that you do. So, what we're saying there then is just an example of this coming to terms and thinking ahead about stuff so that we don't have to end up dealing with an out of control situation. So let's think about autopilot. So if an autopilot starts to do something strange or unexpected, then perhaps something more or something else like trim runaway is what's going to happen. So the AIB report, which is going into the checkbox now, is to do with the Piper PA-23 that suffered from a trim runaway. Now, that aeroplane is a GA aircraft, okay? And trim runaway means that the electric trim started to pitch, cause the aircraft to pitch, and the pilot didn't know what was going on, and more importantly, did not know how to disconnect it. So the bottom line is, back to our poll question there, have a look at circuit breakers, have a think about your captain's brief about, am I going to use any automation today? Am I going to use the autopilot or am I going to use the electric trim? And if that's the case, do I now know exactly, put your finger on the circuit breaker now so you know where it is. So if something goes wrong with it and it starts to do uncommanded things, that you know what's going to happen. Okay. That's, as I said, that accident reports is a hot topic at the moment, and there's some other stuff to do with trim runaways and how to deal with that. Links going in there on the CAA website too, CAP 1774, that is. So let's have a quick look at decision-making prioritization. And the last topic I was going to talk about, we've talked about cognitive bias, really, and just to come back to that, cognitive bias is, stuff that affects our normal decision-making, and the things that give us a poor performance in that area, if you like, is confusion. That happens because we've got poor situational awareness, ambiguity, poor communications. Typically, that's in a multi-crew environment, but I'm sure Greeners is going to talk about that when he talks about the commercial aspect of this, just for your interest as a GA pilot. Poor comms can also be, poor RT and confusion between RT and ourselves. Memory lapses, that comes from poor briefing. If we've revised this vital information just before the flight, these key pieces of information like where the circuit breaker is, okay, then we are briefed appropriately. High workload, well, when the unexpected happens during a period of concentration, such as pre-landing checks, that's when it comes as an even bigger shock. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about startle factor later on too. Urgency is another one, where time is a pressurizing factor. Maybe we need to meet our slot time for a departure or for a landing, so we're rushing. Okay, that does not help anybody. Feeling stressed, that's a human factors thing as well. Home life problems that are in the back of your mind all of the time, that does have an effect on us as humans when we start to try to perform, to a greater extent. In addition to all of those, I'd include things like poor training. Muscle memory can be a problem for a given situation. It's often a key element in handling an urgent situation, but we need to be aware of what we call crossover. In other words, doing the right recovery but for the wrong situation, or perhaps the right recovery but for the wrong type of aircraft, especially for those of us that fly more than one type. Prioritization then, last bit for me then, we need to prioritize our workload in order to avoid letting a situation develop that might lead to a loss of control. An easy example here is aviate, navigate, communicate. That's the priority. We need to do things. We have to fly the aeroplane first. If we're slow on the approach, turning base to final, once again, we need to sort that out and not distract ourselves by being complacent and then saying, okay, I just need to do my RT call now. That really doesn't count. It really doesn't matter. Fly the aeroplane first. And I'm sure you can think of equally other good examples. So that's my little bit. Back to Matt now.
Thanks ever so much, Nigel. We're going to move on to Startle Factor. There's a few questions coming in about trim and CBs and pullable CBs, which we can explore more in Q&A, but it's interesting. But I believe the certification standard, I don't know about microlight and permit installations, as they may have different, but certainly in certified aircraft, there should always be a pullable CB as part of the certified installation for autopilot and or trim. Now, the interesting thing is it's understanding the system architecture and that. So, for example, if you go in many of the diamonds, there isn't a separate trim, auto trim or trim CB. It's actually integrated with the autopilot CB. So if you have a trim problem in a diamond, you have to pull the autopilot CB. It's one CB, but there may actually be a separate trim switch. Some of the Technums, for instance, even have a flip over switch to operate the trim from the left-hand seat to the right-hand seat as well. Somebody said, yeah, it's true for permit aircraft as well. So it's yeah, be interesting to read into your manual and your design. So yeah, but we can discuss that more in Q&A. There's a few interesting questions coming up. Thank you. But I want to keep us moving because this is a really interesting section. Greeners, back to you to talk about Startle Factor, please.
So Startle, for me, this is the critical part of the whole session this evening. By far and away the most important factor to take on board. Startle is a killer. Okay, I think we're just scratching the surface here, but and I think the industry has done itself something of a disservice by referring to this issue as Startle, because Startle sounds a little bit soft and fluffy. It's the sort of thing that happens in a horror movie. But this is, make no mistake, by far and away has the potential to be the biggest killer here in terms of the impact that it has on us. And very quickly, what's the difference between startle and surprise? Surprise is when you go to your home and you find that a friend has thrown a surprise birthday party. Startle is you're walking through the door and a whole bunch of fireworks and explosives go off behind you, and for a period of time you're unable to deal with what's going on. So what is Startle Factor? Let's have a look at the next slide.
Oh, we've got a poll first.
Right,
yeah.
time for a poll, of course. Yes. So there's no right answers to this, but we're interested in terms of the experience of people on this webinar. Have you had an incident whilst flying where you were startled? And I don't mean facetiously. Yes, the landing was actually really good, and that was a really huge startling event for you. But in terms of things that have caused you to go flipping heck, that was a little bit more interesting than I wanted it to be. I'll be interested in your collective response to this. So shall we have a look at what people have put down? So lots of people possibly living in the avoid part of the avoid, recognise, recover have managed to stay out of incidents where they're startled. Nearly half of the guys watching have been startled a little. A third have been startled a lot, and 3% startled so much it caused an accident. If we're all in a room now, then I'd get you to talk about those, but we can't do that. But startle is very much an issue. So let's move on then. So startle is our reaction to something that we didn't expect. That's a little bit soft and gentle. The FAA say, and I love this description: an uncontrollable automatic muscle reflex, raised heart rate, blood pressure, etc., elicited by exposure to a sudden intense event that violates a pilot's expectations. And that's more pointing towards what I think startle is. It's violating our expectations, and I think that's really good words there. So as GA pilots, when might startle be an issue? Well, basically whenever bad stuff happens, okay? Typically power issues in critical situations. So a complete loss of power, you're going to be startled because you're not expecting it, and it's something that clearly has the potential to turn into a nasty situation. Engine failure after takeoff, partial power loss, all of these things are going to cause startle. And basically at the very time where we really need to be on top form, our ability to deal with the challenge is likely to be materially degraded. We've put together, the Ultimate High team put together a great video on YouTube, which there will be linked to along with Owen Sims. It explains why this happens. Okay, we're going to go through this, but once again, I can't state enough, this is the biggest contributing factor, is most likely to kill us in the event of a flight upset. And bear in mind, control is lost in the head. Okay, Xavier Smith talks a lot about brain stall. He compares it to aerodynamic stall. We have to get rid of the brain stall before we can actually deal with whatever is happening with the airplane. So what happens? We have complicated brains. We have our caveman brain or lizard brain, which we grew up with many thousands of years ago, and we have our modern thinking brain. At times of stress, the body dumps a whole bunch of hormones into our body to help us deal with the situation, maybe to fight, flight, freeze. Okay, and we call this the amygdala hijack. And what happens is the chimp brain or our caveman brain takes over our thinking brain and prepares the body. That means that we may well not be able to operate as we normally do. And again, make no mistake, it could be that this startle completely debilitates us and restricts our ability to apply rational thought. If we just skip to the next video and play the video, I'll talk through it very quickly. We don't have sound on this, but this is a guy who is on a GA UPRT course, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. This is actually a skidding stall where a little bit of rudder is put on as we turn from base leg to final, just as Nigel was talking about earlier on. But on this occasion, we don't put the wings level and go around. We put a little bit of rudder in to help us go around the corner. And if we had audio, you would hear the guy in the right-hand seat who knows what's coming say an awful lot of bad words, which are bleeped out, but maybe Matt thought that the words, even the bleeping out, was too bad. And the interesting thing is that even though the guy in the right-hand seat here knew what was coming, he was completely unable to control his reaction to the event. And that's what potentially happens to us in Startle.
Do you know what, Green is? I'm just going to play the last 10 seconds of that again, and I want people to watch what happens to the right-hand seat, the pilot's head. Watch what happens to his head and his vision and where he's looking. I'm going to play this again. So just going to restart it from here when you go. Watch what happens to where his ability to look. Look.
Yeah, there you go. Classic Startle. And interestingly, so if you just go back to the previous picture, but previous slide very quickly, please.
Yeah.
That picture on the right-hand side shows a classic Startle response. Okay, the caveman response. You see the eyes are wide open to get maximum information in visually. The nostrils are flared to get as much air into the body as possible. Same with the mouth. The mouth is wide open to get oxygen in to prepare for that fight, flight, freeze. And that is not a deliberate reaction. That's just what your body does. And so the big thing about Startle when it comes to flight upsets is that we have to remember, under pressure, we don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. And you can train for this. Exposure to the all-attitude environment and practice in making safe recoveries using the correct recovery techniques builds competence and confidence. It improves our cognitive limits, and it gives us more of a margin in challenging flight upset conditions. Okay, we're looking to build resilience here. By definition, when we experience a Startle event, we're never going to not react, but through training for it, we can reduce the magnitude of the impact and the duration of the impact. We build resilience, the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties. Thanks.
Thanks. And Sophie's put a link there in the chat box. Real much longer video. Great one from the Ultimate High team. And we'll also send out the link to the YouTube of that that little one, the video that we played as well, if you want to listen to the audio. What we're going to do next is move on to what to do if you end up out of control. And then we're going to look at some of the commercial UPRT, just a bit of interest in there as well. Another poll just to keep you interested before I do this next section. So question here, if we can have the questions up, please, Sophie. What does the bottom of the white arc on the ASI, airspeed indicator, indicate? What do people think? flaps limiting speed, flaps up stall speed, flaps down stall speed, all the rotate speed. What does the bottom of the white arc on the ASI indicate? I'll give you a freebie hint as well. Any of you that are doing FI or CRI courses or thinking about this, you'll do all questions like this. Is definitely the kind of thing you can read up before doing your courses and save yourself some stress from your FIE. But let's have a look at the results, please. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix of results. The actual answer is C. It's the flap down stall speed, and that's in the landing configuration. So actually, it's well worth going and having a look at your ASI and the markings and just refreshing yourself as to what they all mean. There's actually some really interesting information on there as well. I was doing a test on an aeroplane that it was a single, but it had a blue line marking. Now, most people flying twins are familiar with what the blue lines, but there was also a single with a blue line marking on there as well. So here you go. If you're bored or struggling to think, you might go away and do some research. What do you think that meant? Or we can give you the answer at the end. So what to do if you end up out of control. Now, let me be upfront and clear. What I'm going to discuss here is the current training advice from the CEA. Some of you may be aware there are ongoing discussions about potentially updating and evolving this advice, and you may have been involved or may have heard about this as well. And I was at the CEA Senior Examiner meeting in September, and we did discuss some thoughts. I know Greeners has been quite involved in staffing some thoughts, and Nigel has as well. And I think we may see some evolution of how we teach and train some of the stall exercises in UKGA, which is going to be a good thing, but that work is still ongoing. Mark will discuss some of the UPRT techniques yet, but for now, let us keep the current teaching and concepts separate from that evolution discussion. And I'd just like to observe here as well, many people are just trained for test, and then they forget the different stalls in the tests and why they're there. What we're also looking to do, and we're really trying to encourage for the instructing examining community, is to move away from stalling being an academic exercise and move it into scenario based. So we actually see what scenarios, what situations are you going to face in real life, and how are you going to do that? How can you handle those as well? So this is an area that I think we can all have a think about and practice in the instructing and the flying community. So signs of the approaching stall. Let us just remind ourselves on these. Like I say, I'm not going to give you a stalling brief or lecture here. These are taken from the Skyway Code. There's some nice graphics and some nice information in there. And these are also in some of the other CAA loss of control documentations out there. Low and reducing airspeed, decreasing control effectiveness, high nose attitude. You might get the audio stall warner, and that will only operate if the system's serviceable, of course, and light buffet, which is the main key indicator. I flew an aircraft last week and for a test, and the stall warner was inop. So the candidate recognised the light buffet and appropriately recovered in that, and we found that the stall warning vane was a little bit sticky, so the aircraft needed a bit of attention. But yeah, it can happen. Symptoms of the stall. I'm not going to read them all through. You can see them there. Hopefully you're all familiar with this. Heavy buffet is going to be the main symptom, yeah. But any of the following singularly or in any combination will indicate that the aircraft has entered the stalled condition. Okay, so heavy buffet, you may get that. You may get increased control vibration, nose drop, and that may occur even before a vibration is noticed. You'll get sink, possible wing drop there as well. And I can see in the chat as well, some of the people are coming up with some really other interesting debate as well. Yeah, people talking about some aircraft do not exhibit buffet. Yeah, the degree of buffet may be all there as well. So yeah. Okay. Lots of people commenting on the question on the ASI as well. Yeah, you know, this is good. It's good debate. Yeah. Beginning of the white arc, or bottom. Yeah, it just shows how language and that can be misinterpreted there as well. So it's a good debate for FI courses and for instructors and trainers there as well about how it can be misinterpreted. So yeah, I absolutely recognise and accept the comments on the question. Thank you. The standard stall recovery. Okay, so the way to recover from a basic stall and regain full control, as Green has said, is reducing the angle of attack below the stalling angle. We've got to do that by moving the controls forward to select and lower nose attitude. And how much to lower that nose is going to be learned by practice. Now, this is going to help regain the indicated airspeed, but it's also going to lead to a further height loss. So what we are looking to do is minimize this high loss and regain full control and flying speed. And we do that, or we teach that routinely now, by increasing the power as the angle of attack is reduced as well. And then we can ease the aircraft out of the descent. And this is what, in the training environment at the minute, everybody generally refers to as the standard stall recovery. Now, the above signs and symptoms that we discussed apply during level, unaccelerated flight. During turns or higher G loading, they may be reduced warnings of the approaching stall. And you should take recovery action as soon as you recognize the signs of approaching stall, even from a warning system or other indications. And the overall thing that we really want to get across here, and Greeners is going to talk a lot more about, I know, is we want pilots to be confident and able to recognize and recover and how to know how to handle the stall. It's not part of normal flying. So the aim is to try and avoid this in the first place, but we want to be confident and capable of dealing with it if we should experience. There's a good CA safety sense leaflet. The CA safety sense leaflets have all been redone. A lot of them are really, really good pieces of work, actually. And there's a link there in the chat box to that as well. Now, I also want to quickly cover unusual attitudes. Now, what we're talking about here with unusual attitudes, I'm talking mainly about instrument and night flying here. So when we're talking about unusual attitudes, I'm talking about the aircraft's not in the attitude that the pilot thinks it is or wants it to be in. Maybe a temporary loss of orientation caused by distraction during normal instrument or night flying. You know, it might not be an extreme attitude, as Green has showed earlier, but it's basically the aircraft's not doing what we want it to do. So in instrument and night flying, the most likely reason for being unusual attitudes, inattention to attitude control while carrying out cockpit tasks. Less likely reasons are an insidious technical failure that's gone unnoticed or inadvertently entering cloud. But, you know, with regular visual checks and procedures like Mark and Nigel have both come across as well, that's less likely. So it's a distraction, inattention while doing other things, certainly in that night and instrument environment. Yeah, thank you as well. I can see some people, we have lots of problems with the CAA links on the website that expire and go. My honest advice is to try and Google it and pick them up every time. They do lots of different things to the website where the links go dead. Nigel, I know, has lots of problems with this with me. We do as examiners finding forms and things like that. But thank you to some of the people that have done that as well. And I think Sophie's trying to just regenerate those links for today's version of the CA website. So unusual attitude recovery. Remember, we're talking about night and instrument type stuff here. The recovery that we teach in the training environment, and those of you that have done IMC ratings or IRs will be familiar with this. Speed, roll, pitch. First thing, check the speed and action the throttle if required. If it's low or decreasing, apply full power. High or increasing, idle throttle. If stable, leave the throttle alone. Roll the wings level using the attitude indicator, and then pitch and select level flight on the AI, hold, trim, and adjust power to around the cruise and retrim. The power setting doesn't have to be accurate there. And then cross-check the instruments. Now, one of the things that you could consider doing after you've recovered is something like a hero drill. So height, check the height and ensure you're above a safe altitude. If not, let's do something about that. Climb. Erect. So check the instruments are functioning erect, and you've got some good erect references to use. Was an instrument misleading you? Was that a cause of the problem? So that leads on to the next thing, which is the reason. Why did that happen? Is there an instrument or a control problem? Why did I get distracted? What's distracting me? Am I unwell? Do I need to check? Have we got a CO alert happening as well? Is this some kind of poisoning event potentially? So just think about, why did that happen? And then orientation, where am I? Where do I need to go? What do I need to do now as well? Okay. And this can happen. I've had this happen in various bits of training. I've had somebody have an autopilot, and do all sorts of have the autopilot do all sorts of weird things. This had other students get disorientated and get themselves into an unusual attitude in the circuit at night, where they've got disorientated there as well. So these things can happen to you. Mark's going to expand on some of this in the next section. So envelope protection systems, we don't have time to cover these in depth during this webinar, but increasingly some aircraft have additional protection and mitigation technologies. So what these are, the safety technologies designed to help pilots avoiding the aircraft's safe operating limits, and things like speed, angle of attack, load factor, bank angle, they can all be protected to varying degrees. They are very common in some of the high-end aircraft. I was testing in a Cirrus last week, but had a lot of this system, and it was, made some real positive corrections if you try to overbank, for example. But they're now coming more and more common in some of the lighter end general aviation aircraft as well. So, you could, some of the higher end microlights, even some of the permit aircraft, we're now starting to see these technologies trickle down into those as well. Really, it's all about ground study, really understanding what are the parameters, how does the system work, how can it help you, and how can it potentially mislead you or give you problems. So here's just an example of some of the ones that are out there as well. I should also mention as well, ballistic recovery systems. They're obviously becoming more and more common in lots of light aircraft, like I say, all the way down from, I know, EV-97, C-42 microlights there as well. And obviously some of the higher end aircraft as well. This is another consideration. It's another thing in your toolbox, to use the cliche, that you could use in a loss of control event. And we can perhaps discuss this in a little bit more in Q&A. If any of you have ever gone through or been involved in the Cirrus training, they have some really rigorous training and recommendations in how they bring CAPS, which is their protection system, their ballistic recovery system, into the thing, and they have some, they put it in a real procedural, really SOP drilled manner as to how to appreciate their system and when to use it, which is really interesting to read up on, even if you're not going to fly one. It's something to think about for sure. Okay, brief canter through, and there is some comments coming in the chat. Thank you for those as ever. I'll try and pick those up in the Q&A as well. But now I'm going to hand back to Mark to talk about commercial UPRT and some things here. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Matt. So, of course, GA UPRT is not a mandated training requirement, although there's a strong school of thought that suggests it should be, given the challenges associated with accidents and fatalities resulting from lost control in flight. There are a number of GA UPRT providers out there. On aircraft, UPRT is mandatory for new commercial pilots and has been since December 2019. Let's have a quick chat through it. To a certain extent, we recommend, or there's a recommendation that GA pilots don't attend commercial UPRT. There are a bunch of differences. You can get some good stuff out of it, but you can talk about things like high altitude aerodynamics, pitch power couple of powerful underslung engines which aren't appropriate. But there are a lot of useful factors to be taken away. So the regulators in 2014-ish came out with a list of events that they felt commercial pilots should be able to recover from, and these are those events. So a stall event, a nose high unusual attitude, a nose low unusual attitude, a spiral dive, an incipient spin. Now it's fascinating, depending on which regulatory body you consult, there are a variety of different recommendations for how to recover from these scenarios. So there's 5 different scenarios there, and there have been between 3 and 5 different recovery techniques, depending on who you consult, who you speak to. So let's go to the next slide. I also asked the question, if you find yourself in a flight upset, are you likely to be A, calm, relaxed, good situation awareness, completely on top of the situation, huge spare capacity, or B? And it's obviously going to be B. Okay, we're going to be stressed, we're going to be startled. We've talked about the impact of startle. So at the very time we want to be at our most composed, we're probably going to be least able to do stuff. So we're going to be subject to this amygdala hijack I talked about earlier on, and we're going to struggle to get our act together. So to put yourself in that situation where you have potentially up to 5 different recovery strategies. So first of all, you have to identify exactly what's happening, and then you have to remember which of the 3 to 5 recovery strategies to apply. We think that isn't particularly helpful. So we have a big focus on keeping it simple, stupid. And so what we have come up with, and which most airlines in the world are going towards now, is a universal recovery strategy, which is this: it's push, roll, power, stabilize. So let me just talk through that very quickly, and let's talk about it in the context of a stall initially. Okay, so we determine we're in an upset. We don't necessarily know what the upset is, but let's assume that it's a stall. The first thing we're going to do is push all of the flying controls centrally forward. So that's the stick or yoke plus the rudder pedals to neutral, centrally forward to half a G. What does that do? It reduces the angle of attack below the critical alpha. So we're going to get the wing flying again. That's great. If we unload to half a G, then it means the stall speed goes down. At half a G, square root of a half is 0.7. So the stall speed goes down by about 30%. So that's really helpful. And it also makes the ailerons effective. If you try and roll an airplane before you get rid of the stall, it's not necessarily going to do what you expect it to do. So once we've unloaded, or we've pushed forward on the stick, we're going to roll the wings so that the wings are level with the horizon. What that does, it gives us our lift vector being diametrically opposed to our weight vector that's going straight down. Then, and only after we've done those 2 things, we're going to think about power. What's our energy situation? In the GEO world, it's pretty easy. If you're pointing up, you want to put power on. If you're pointing down, you want to take power off. Okay, and then once we've done that, we're going to stabilize back to straight and level flight. We're all comfortable with straight and level. It's where we spend most of our lives, and so that's a nice place to sort ourselves out, sort out our pattering heart, and figure out what is going on. So that works for stalls, but it also works for those other 4 scenarios. It works for incipient spins, it works for nose high unusual attitudes, it works for nose low unusual attitudes, and it works for spiral dives. So it works in all of those situations. So now, if you have a single recovery technique that works for everything, it takes away the identification of the upset challenge and the associated delays. It takes away the delay of recalling, oh, which of the recovery techniques am I going to use? The only thing that varies is the amount of push. If you're nose high, you're probably going to do a lot of push. If you're nose low, it's just a check forward. And the cadence changes. If you're pointing straight at the ground, you're going to be getting the power off as early as you can after you've done your push and your roll, still the same sequence. And we always fly the recoveries on a say and do basis, which is the next slide. So we do this on, we make sure our students, our commercial students and our GEO students say and do. So they say push, roll, power, and there's a bunch of reasons. It's very, very powerful. By saying the recovery techniques out loud as they are carrying out the recovery, it helps them remember the sequence. Now, I know there's only 3 things, or 4 if you include stabilize, but it helps you remember the sequence. Secondly, by saying it out loud, you use a different part of the brain. And so then it helps reinforce the primacy of push roll power, because a lot of people haven't used push roll power all the way through their flying career. The third thing it does, if you are in a multi-crew environment, it means that the pilot not flying, the pilot monitoring, can update their mental model to make sure, excuse me, that they're on the same page. And critically, by saying push out loud, once you've done this a lot of times, it helps regain SA. Okay, it helps you put the chimp back in the cage if you're going to use chimp paradox. You know that by saying push, you're now setting yourself off down a path of action that ends up in stabilized flight, and that's very, very powerful. From a psychological perspective, it really helps the whole sequence, and that's really what we advocate for the commercial pilots. And as Matt was saying earlier on, it may be that moves into other parts of aviation as well. Thanks, Matt.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Greeners. We've got a few questions, and I'm going to take some things here. Somebody's made a point, actually. I'll just pick this one first up as well. Somebody's put, you know, this push roll power thing. You're in a developed spin, a full spin, or whatever you call it. Well, push roll power is not going to work then, is it? So, how do you sort of square that? Because you know, so if stuff's gone wrong, you're in a spin, but could you push roll power?
So this is for flight upsets.
Yeah.
Okay. It does not cover a fully developed spin. However,
Yeah.
if for most incipient spins before the airplane becomes fully developed, it will prevent a fully developed spin from occurring. You have to be pretty committed to put an airplane in a fully developed spin. The bottom line is, if you enter a fully developed spin at low level, with the greatest respect, none of us, even if we're the best pilots in the world, are going to be able to do anything about it. Fully developed spin is very much part of the aerobatic syllabus, but you're right, it will not work in a fully developed spin. And if you're flying an aerobatic airplane, it's critical that you understand the spin recovery for the specific airplane that you're flying. But it will work depending on the airplane. Excuse me. For the first 1.5 rotations in most airplanes, push roll power is going to get the airplane out of an incipient spin.
Okay, and somebody's also asked about the nose high unusual attitude case versus push roll power. What do you think about that?
So
And I'm going to
exactly the
ask you
same,
this
because in a nose high UP, you still potentially are stalled. So the primary thing we're looking to do is to reduce the angle of attack. Once the angle of attack is reduced, then we're going to put power on in the push roll power sequence. But the primary action is to reduce the angle of attack to help get rid of the stall. The danger of putting power on when you don't have wings level is that potentially bad things happen. You want to wait until the wings are level and the airplane is flying again, ideally, before we put the power on.
And somebody else has also asked about the nose down attitude. Sorry, I might as well canter through these different scenarios while we're here.
Yeah.
So about the nose down situation. So
Sure.
yeah, what do you think about push roll power in that one?
It's still push roll power, and somebody mentioned the spiral dive as well. So full disclosure, the FAA advocates closing the throttle first in a spiral dive. And you have two airplanes that start at the same time. This is FAA closed throttle first, and this is push roll power. If you affect the recoveries at the same time, the guy who closes his throttle first will recover with a smaller height loss. However, as soon as you have more than one recovery technique, you have to build in two delays. You have to build in the delay for what on earth is happening to me, and then you have to build an additional delay for, okay, I know a number of different recovery techniques, which one am I going to use today? And by the time you've used up all that additional time, you're probably going to come out at the same height as the guy who's done push roll power. In a spiral dive, why do we push? Well, let's think about this. If we're at the structural load limit of the airplane at 2.5 G, and we're pulling 2.5 G, if we don't push and reduce the load, then the upcoming wing is going to exceed the structural load limit of the airplane. So we check forwards to a maximum of 1 G before we roll the airplane. So that's the push in a spiral dive.
Greeners, thank you, and sorry to pick on you, and you let you have a break now. That's great. Just a signpost as well, we will be finishing by 8:45, so we've just got a little bit of time to pick up a few discussions. We did have some questions submitted online as well, and I'm going to bring Nigel in now. So Nigel, and apologies, lots of people have said UPRT, what's that as well? I mean, again, it's another good lesson for us instructors and examiners out there as well. We throw abbreviations around, don't we? And we just kind of assume that everybody know. I know Mark did mention it, but it would have been good to put it up there on the slide, wouldn't it? That's definitely a bit of learning from experience for us there as well. So thank you for raising that as well. Good point. You know, we throw abbreviations around like anything in aviation, but not everybody in our communities come across them. So yeah, thank you for that. But Nigel, so UPRT course in kind of big handfuls and that, you get somebody comes to you and goes, Nigel, I need to do a UPRT course. What are you going to do with them? What does it involve?
Okay, so let's make a distinction here between what Greeners have been talking about, which is the commercial advanced UPRT course. Okay, that is a very specific course that commercial pilots have to have before they can get a commercial job. That is a training certificate they have to do, and that is very much geared towards the commercial commercial transport jet flying, where we actually do the training in something like a Firefly. Now, I'm talking about the commercial UPRT course here. We do the training in the Firefly, but we simulate a multi-crew environment. It's very, very procedural with call-outs between the two pilots, and also we simulate the recovery actions as if the aircraft had large underslung jet engines. Okay, so that's the UPRT course that's done by the commercial guys. I know Greeners does a GA UPRT course as well, and that would be very much geared not to do multi-crew cooperation, but as a single pilot ops, doing the recovery from what you and I would call unusual attitudes. Okay, now the techniques may or may not be the same depending on the course, the course provider that you go to, but like Matt pointed out at the beginning, the current recovery procedures from the CAA are one thing. And they may or may not, who knows, it's up for discussion at the moment about trying to standardize some of those procedures that Greeners have been talking about that comes from the commercial UPRT course. Just a quickie, I saw one of the comments in the chat go through to say, if you don't like doing aerobatics, then you won't like doing a UPRT course. That's not true, actually. It's very far from it. You might find an odd UPRT provider that you come away thinking, well, that was just an aerobatics course. That's not what true commercial UPRT is all about at all. Commercial UPRT is actually quite a gentle course, okay, because you don't go pulling 4G in a 737 unless you want to pull the wings off. So all of the maneuvers, it's very proceduralized, and as Greens was saying, getting people to follow the process and the procedure that is best achieved in recovering or preventing the upset in the first place. So that's the major difference between GA sort of what I'm called GA unusual attitude recoveries compared to commercial UPRT courses.
And thanks, Nigel. That's really good. Another question that we come in. Somebody said, what about the old just let everything go and natural stability will sort it out? Or just, you get in a mess, just let everything go.
Try that in a Firefly and see how well that goes.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Greeners? Because it has been a technique, has been talked about in some aeros and things, hasn't it?
I think that the Beggs-Muller spin recovery technique advocates taking your hands off the stick, and that works very well in a number of airplanes. In a pits, you can take your hand off the stick and just apply opposite rudder, and the airplane will come out of spin. If you take your hands off the stick in something like a Bulldog or a T-67, the airplane will enter an aggravated spin, which your average pilot will probably struggle to recover from. So it varies by airplane, but in the old days, some people used to advocate incipient spin recovery in GA airplanes by centralizing the controls. That works because for a spin we need two things: we need stall and we need yaw. So by centralizing the stick, you probably get rid of the stall, and by centralizing the rudders, you probably get rid of the yaw. But it's a bit of what I would call a pacifist response. By using push roll power, we're actively getting the airplane out of the incipient spin faster than if we just centralize the controls.
There's another thing, common misconception, Matt, as well. There is a standard stall recovery. There is not a standard spin recovery. You know, if you want to know how to recover an aircraft from a spin, you have to look in the POH for that aircraft, because they might be very similar, but they will have specific slight differences. Firefly being one of them, for example. I won't go into the details, but you know that each aircraft has its own spin recoveries. A Robin 2112, you actually do the spin recovery with the stick fully back. So there's a typical example, all right? So they're not the same. There is no such thing as a standard spin recovery, but that's sort of aerobatic recovery training we're talking about there.
Great. Somebody's picked up as well. I put TMG in the slide, but we didn't put it in the actual poll. So another wrist slap there. I've got a big to-do list on my little pad here of things, actually. So people are picking everything up now. We're really into these workshops now. So thank you for that. We shall rectify that. Yeah, somebody's put Robin 2160 stick back works too. Yeah, so a 2160, you can have stick back. There's also a CAA supplement which talks about recovery with the stick forward as well. So yeah, if you want to look for 2060, quite an interesting aircraft actually to spin. Somebody has asked, in fact, it's Paul. Hello, Paul. When practicing stalls, I was taught to keep the wings level with rudder until the stall is developed. Is this still taught? No. So I'll let the others add that the use when practicing stalls, the rudder is to keep the aircraft in balance. It's not to keep the wings level. Is the kind of the summary headline. But Greeners, do you want to add your sage words to that?
I think that without wishing to be overly critical of some historical teaching, if we think about this, I've always said the conditions for a spin are stall and yaw. If a pilot gets into a flight upset involving a stall, then they're probably behind the airplane. So the likelihood of them being able to perfectly manage some rudder inputs, I think, is comparatively small. So if you do actually push using on the commercial side, if you push all the flying controls centrally forward, you're automatically making sure that you're not introducing any yaw and you're getting rid of the stall. So yeah, you hear things like picking up the dropped wing with rudder and all sorts of stuff. I think very strongly, yeah, use of rudder around the stall, yeah, that way lies dragons.
Thanks. Somebody's also mentioned in the Q&A, Tony, thank you, about use of AI for monitoring pilot state and all the rest of it, kind of out of the scope of what we're talking about tonight. But it's interesting because some of the aircraft, the very high-end one, the Cirruses and similar types and all the rest of it, you can see where the thinking and where the systems design is going. You know, there's lots of aircraft now have got that little blue button on the Garmin that we showed you, but you get into a pickle, you press that and it puts you straight and level. And even some of the higher end ones now will actually divert you to a suitable aircraft in the database and fly an approach at that if you're a passenger and you go up front and press it. It's quite so already we've got cars. I had a hire car the other day that was constantly monitoring me and was telling you know, when you look sleepy or you know, if you're not responding and things like that. The cars are doing that now as well. I had to nip to a shop and the car went berserk because my little lad was in the back and it set off alarms saying you've left a child in the back. Are you aware of that? It's you know, it's kind of quite amazing technology. So will that come to aircraft? I 100% sure we'll see that coming to high-end aircraft very soon. Be very interesting to see how that develops. Slightly out of thing. Going to take one very last question. And somebody said, Greeners, you know, stalling in the descent. You're talking rubbish. You're madman. What? How can the angle of attack be exceeded in a descent? You know, what was that all about? That slide, is that true?
How can the angle of attack be exceeding the descent? Look at Air France 447. Look at AirAsia 8501. You had airplanes with 10,000 plus feet per minute rates of descent. The relative airflow is coming from underneath the wing, and you had effective angle of attack of 60 degrees. If the airplane stalls at 12 degrees and you've got an angle of attack of 60 degrees, you are more stalled than a stall thing on a stall day on planet Stall.
Their end of the aerodynamics lecture. Brilliant. Absolute last question for 1 minute. Nigel, distractions, dropping stuff in the cockpit and, all of that. Some people said, how do we avoid that? Now, my answer, and I briefed a test candidate on this today, if he's watching, cockpit management. That's the key, isn't it, Nigel? And we see this on PPL test a lot. Cockpit management in the aircraft, isn't there?
Absolutely. You need to be, dare I say, neat and tidy in the cockpit, and so do your passengers. Certainly in some of the older warbirdy types that some of us fly, it is really strict that we say to passengers in particular, you must have absolutely nothing in your pockets, because if you drop it, we have got zero chance of retrieving it, and it will find its way somewhere that is not good from an aircraft control point of view. But certainly from a normal GA environment, if you drop a pen on the floor, then worst case scenario, yes, it could jam a control perhaps, but more importantly, you've lost your pen if you haven't got a spare one, what you're going to write with. That's the first problem. Second problem is how you're going to pick it up without an autopilot, because invariably these aeroplanes don't have autopilots, and it is just a distraction. You're now thinking about your pen more than something else in the cockpit that might be more relevant to be thinking about at that time of flight.
Yeah, brilliant. So cockpit management, and that's something we might come back to in a future, because we're going to be looking in a future workshop about GNSS moving maps and using those in the cockpit and how to safely integrate those into your flying. And that's something we will probably touch on, because heads down, moving map, iPad on your leg or whatever, that directly links to some of the stuff we've been talking about tonight, I'm sure. But that's it from us. Thank you so much for joining us. Great numbers on tonight. Great engagement as well. Remember, you'll get a replay so you can watch back and look at some of the diagrams. You'll get the links in an email there as well. Once you finish tonight as well, the survey will pop up in your window as well. Please do take time. Again, we don't tell the CA what anybody said anything. The reason we take this feedback, and that is A, we can prove things, and B, we can see what trends, what's worrying people out there, what people want to hear engage about. So this workshop, the moving map one, the medical one we have, they're all a direct result of the community in our surveys, people going, we want to hear about this, we want to talk about this. This is why we got Greeners on with Nigel to talk about this tonight, and I think it's been great value, so thank you. Just like to thank both Nigel and Greeners. Absolutely brilliant from both of you as ever. Thank you very much. Also, if you want to find out more, you can find their commercial setups easily online, and that I'm sure they would be very delighted to speak to you through their channels or their contacts if you want to take any of this stuff further. Also, lastly, say thanks to Sophie behind the scenes, managing the tech, as ever, supporting us. But other than that, if you see us around the bazaars, come and chat to us, come and say hello. It's great when people do that. Or if you've got queries or feedback, please do drop it to us on email and we'll get around to it and get back to you. But other than that, just wish everybody a good night and safe flying coming up. Thanks, everybody. Take care.